Classes. JavaScript classes allow you to combine properties and methods. To code along with this video, open the file index.html in the folder start lecture 2_8. To create a new class, you use the keyword class, then the name of the class you're creating, followed by curly braces. JavaScript is a big fan of curly braces. If you need to initialize values in a class, you need a special function called a constructor. This function is called when you create a new instance of the class. To clear up all this terminology, let's create a simple class to represent a 2D point. We enter class, all lowercase, then the class name, we'll call it point, then the curly braces, and for a point we'll need two parameters, an x value and a y value. The constructor function is where we initialize the class properties. Inside a class, you need to use this to access the class instance. We set this.x to the passed parameter x and this.y to y, and that's it. To create a new instance of the point, simply use this syntax: new point, then the parameters. Save your work and over in your browser go back to the root of the resources and open lecture 2_8 start. If you enter PT, you'll see that you have an instance of a point. The great thing about classes is the way we can add methods. Before we see this in action, let's create a new class. This time it's a class to represent a rectangle. We'll have left, top, width and height as parameters. Like we did with the point class, we copy the parameters to class properties using the this keyword. Now we can create two instances of the rectangle class using new rectangle and four parameters. Remember, parameter 1 is the left position, parameter 2 the top position, parameter 3 is the width, and parameter 4 the height. If you save and back in the browser refresh, then enter rec1, you'll see the parameters of the first rectangle. So far this isn't very different from an object. Let's start to explore how it differs. We're going to add a special kind of property to the class. If we use the keyword get, we can then enter a function with no parameters that returns a value. If we use this syntax, it's called a getter property. It's used to add a property that can be calculated from other class properties. We'll create a getter property that returns the area of the rectangle. This is simply width times height. Don't forget to use this for class properties. Save, browser refresh and enter rect1.area. We get the value 5000, 100 times 50. Notice we just use the property name area, no brackets. If you do add brackets, you'll get rect1.area is not a function, because this special kind of function, a getter property, cannot be called like a standard JavaScript function. It appears to anything calling it as though it's a property of the class. Now let's create a method. Inside a class, a method does not use the function keyword. You just use the name of the method, then any parameters inside brackets, and finally the code for the method inside curly braces. Let's create a method that moves the rectangle. We'll use the parameters dx and dy. Dx to indicate the movement to the left property, and dy the movement to the top property. We simply use the plus equals operator. Remember, this dot left plus equals dx is the same as this dot left equals this dot left plus dx. It's simply a shortcut way of scripting this. Save, browser refresh and enter rec1.move 0, 100. Now if you enter rec1, the top value is 110, not the original 10 value that the rectangle was when we created it. Now for a more complex method. We're going to create a method that takes another rectangle as a parameter and returns true if the passed rectangle overlaps with the rectangle calling the method. To do this, we'll create 4 points, the top left and bottom right of each rectangle. If left of rect1, L1.x, is greater than the right edge of rect2, R2.x, then there cannot be an overlap. If the left edge of Rect 2 is greater than the right edge of Rect 1, then there cannot be an overlap. We use the logical OR operator, two vertical lines, so that if either of these are true, we return false, there is no overlap. This completes the horizontal test. Next we test vertically. For this we test if the top edge of Rect 1 is below the bottom edge of Rect 2, or the top edge of Rect 2 is below the bottom edge of Rect 1. If either of these are true, then there cannot be an overlap. For an overlap to occur, all of these four conditions must be false. If that is the case, then we can return true. Let's finally enter some messages that use the methods we've created. First we'll display the area of Rect 1 using the getter property area. Then we'll use the overlap method to print an overlap message to the console. Then we'll use the move method to move Rect 1, and now we'll repeat the overlap message. Initially the rectangles overlap, like this. After moving Rect 1, they're like this, with no overlap. Save, refresh the browser, and you get three messages. The area of Rect 1, and then two messages about the overlap of Rect 1 and Rect 2. The first is true, the second, after the move call, is false. Great work! Classes connect properties and methods in a way that makes code clearer, and you will see a lot of classes as you work through the course. As your code gets more complex, you're likely to use more than one text file to store your code. When this happens, a great way to load the code is to use modules, and we'll look at that in the next video. See you in a minute. This video comes from my Udemy course, The Beginner's Guide to 3D Web Game Development with ThreeJS. Get the full course by following the link at nicklever.com/courses.